Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we venture into the darkest corners of European history to meet a man whose very name became synonymous with terror. Imagine yourself on a cold stone parapet, a bitter wind whipping at your face as you peer down at a sprawling, desolate plain. Below, a forest of sharpened stakes pierces the twilight, each one bearing a grim, silent burden. The air is thick with a scent you can't quite place, but your body knows. It's the stench of fear, of power, and of unimaginable cruelty. This is the world of Vlad the Impaler. You're about to walk in his shadow, and I'll be honest, you probably won't survive this journey unscathed. Your heart will race, your breath will catch, and you might find yourself pulling your blanket a little closer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story, like so many others, doesn't begin with a monster, but with a boy. His name, you recall, was Vlad the Third, born sometime around 1431 in the Transylvanian town of Sighișoara. His father, Vlad the Second, was a powerful figure in the tumultuous world of 15th century Eastern Europe. He was a voivode, or prince, of Wallachia, a small but strategically vital principality nestled between the powerful Kingdom of Hungary and the rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire. This was a precarious position, like a tiny boat caught between two great warring ships, and it dictated the fate of every person in Wallachia, from the humblest peasant to the prince himself. Vlad II, your father in this story, was no stranger to this dance of power. He was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a secret society of European monarchs and nobles sworn to protect Christendom from the encroaching Ottoman threat. The symbol of the order was a dragon, and because of this, Vlad II adopted the name Dracul, meaning dragon in the local dialect. His son, our Vlad III, would thus become Dracula, or son of the dragon. This is a name you know, a name that has since been corrupted and sensationalized, but in his time it was simply a lineage, a name of pride, not of dread, yet. As a child, you are not called Dracula, but simply Vlad. You live a life of relative privilege, though privilege in the 15th century is a fragile thing. Your world is one of knights and castles, of jousts and courtly intrigue. But it's also a world of constant threat. You're acutely aware of the shifting alliances and the ever-present danger from the south, the mighty Ottoman Empire. Your father, Dracul, tries to balance on a knife's edge, playing both sides to keep Wallachia from being swallowed whole. He pays tribute to the Ottoman Sultan, a necessary evil, while simultaneously pledging allegiance to the Hungarian crown. A strategic alliance against that very same Sultan is a delicate, dangerous game of political chess, and in 1442, that game finally catches up with him. The Hungarian regent, John Hunyadi, a celebrated military leader, distrusts your father's loyalties and invades Wallachia. Dracul, caught in the middle, makes a desperate and fateful decision. He travels to the Ottoman court to seek an audience with Sultan Murad II. He pledges his loyalty and asks for military support against Hunyadi. The Sultan, ever the pragmatist, agrees to help but demands a price of unimaginable weight to a father. You, Vlad, and your younger brother Radu are to be given to him as political hostages. Imagine the scene, if you will. You're just a boy, perhaps 11 or 12 years old. You stand there, a little stiff in your fine clothes, a mixture of fear and confusion swirling in your gut. Your father, Dracul, is there, his face grim, his eyes avoiding yours. He hands you and Radu over to the Ottoman delegation. You don't understand the full weight of what's happening, but you know this isn't a holiday. This is a form of gilded captivity. You and your brother, Radu, are to be raised at the Sultan's court, ostensibly as pages, but in reality you are pawns. Your lives are the collateral for your father's good behaviour. If he steps out of line, if he dares to defy the Sultan, your lives are forfeit. This mainstream historical fact, the hostage situation of Vlad and his brother Radu at the Ottoman court, is a cornerstone of Vlad's story. It is the crucible in which his personality was forged. Historians still argue whether this period of captivity was the primary cause of his later brutality. Did it fundamentally twist his view of humanity, of loyalty, and of power? Did it plant the seeds of the sadism that would later become his signature? Or was he simply a product of a brutal, unforgiving era? The Sultan, to his credit, doesn't treat you or your brother poorly in the traditional sense. You're not thrown into a dungeon. You're educated alongside the Sultan's own sons. You're taught the ways of war, of diplomacy, of the Islamic faith and the Turkish language. You are given everything you need to survive and even thrive within the confines of the court. But you are not free. You are a prisoner with a gilded cage, and you are constantly reminded of it. You eat their food, you speak their language, you learn their culture, but you're not one of them. You're a Wallachian, a Christian, and a hostage. This is a very different experience than that of your brother Radu, who, as we'll learn later, seemed to adapt to court life with remarkable ease. You, on the other hand, a bit more stubborn, a bit more prideful, resist. You hold on to the memory of your home, your father, and your Wallachian heritage with a fierce, burning resentment. A quirky, almost humorous tidbit from this time is that the Sultan's court was a melting pot of cultures, and it was here that you, a young Vlad, would have been introduced to practices and ideas from all over the known world. One of these was the use of coffee, which was just beginning to gain popularity in the Ottoman Empire. Imagine a young Vlad, steeped in the customs of his Wallachian Orthodox upbringing, being offered this bitter, dark brew for the first time. He probably would have found it strange, a far cry from the wine and mead of his homeland. Perhaps he even developed a taste for it, a small, subtle detail that humanizes him, just for a moment before we return to the darkness. Your time at the Ottoman court is not just about education and political manoeuvring, it's about witnessing. You see firsthand the immense power of the Sultan, the unyielding discipline of the Janissaries, and the ruthless efficiency with which the Ottoman Empire expands its borders. You watch as tribute is paid, as supplicants are brought before the Sultan, as enemies are punished. This is not just a lesson in military strategy, it's a masterclass in absolute power. You learn, you observe, you internalize. You learn what it takes to be a truly feared ruler, a ruler whose word is law and whose enemies tremble at the mere mention of his name. This is a type of power your father Dracul, with his precarious balancing act, never truly possessed. And a deep-seated anger begins to grow inside of you. An anger at your father for putting you in this position, an anger at the Ottomans for taking away your freedom, and an anger at the world for being so cruel. You don't realize it yet, but this bitterness, this cold rage, is the fuel for the fire you will one day ignite. This is the moment, the quiet, painful moment where the legend begins to take shape. The years bleed into one another in the Sultan's court, a gilded prison where you, young Vlad, watch and wait. You are a ghost, a political shadow in a land that is not your own. You learn their languages, study their sciences, and participate in their military drills, but your heart remains in Wallachia, a place you can only recall through hazy, fragmented memories. You see your brother, Radu, adapting with an unsettling grace. He's handsome and charismatic, and the Ottomans seem to favour him. He laughs and carouses with the Sultan's sons, learning to navigate the intricate web of courtly life with a natural ease that you find infuriating. You, on the other hand, are a coiled spring of resentment. Your Wallachian pride, once a simple inheritance, is now a burning shield. You refuse to fully assimilate to become another cog in the vast Ottoman machine. This stark difference in your temperaments, this divergence of paths, is a core part of your story, a personal betrayal that will fester and grow with time. And then, a rumour reaches you. It's carried on the whispers of a new Wallachian diplomat, a low-ranking official who eyes you with a mixture of pity and fear. Your father, Vlad Dracul, has been overthrown. The news is a shock, a seismic jolt to your carefully constructed world. John Hunyadi, the Hungarian regent, has finally had enough of your father's double-dealing. He has installed a new prince in Wallachia, a man named Vladislav II. This new prince is a puppet of the Hungarians, and the fragile peace your father had maintained is shattered. But the worst is yet to come. The whispers grow louder, more insistent, and then they are no longer whispers. You learn of a specific, horrific act of treachery. Hunyadi's forces, in their march to depose your father, also seized your father's eldest son, your half-brother Mirci. The Boyars, the old Wallachian nobility who resented your father's attempts to centralize power, betrayed him. They seized Mirza, and in a public gruesome display, they blinded him with red-hot stakes. But that wasn't enough for them. They then buried him alive. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine this. Your own flesh and blood, a boy not so different from you, subjected to a fate so vile, so unspeakably cruel. This isn't a battle, a noble death in a joust. This is a cold, calculated act of pure sadism, a warning to any who would defy the boyar's power. You sit in your room at the Ottoman court, surrounded by fine silks and exotic perfumes, and the image of your brother, blind and buried, sears itself into your mind. This is not just news of a political coup, it is the brutal, visceral reality of betrayal. And what of your father? The news of his fate is even more tragic. Cornered and abandoned, Vlad Dracul is captured by the Hungarians and brutally murdered. His death isn't a clean beheading on the field of battle. It is a messy, violent affair, the kind of death reserved for traitors. The exact circumstances are murky, but the outcome is clear. The man who gave you the name Dracula, the man who handed you over to the Ottomans to save his country, is dead, and his kingdom is in the hands of his enemies. This is the mainstream historical fact that lights the fire in your belly. The murder of your father and brother is the origin story of the monster you are destined to become. It is a moment of profound psychological and emotional trauma, the kind that can either break a man or temper him into something harder than steel. You're not broken, you are forged. A quirky detail that historians have pieced together about this time is the fact that Vladislav II, the new Prince of Wallachia, was a cousin. He was family, a man who in another time and place you might have shared a banquet table with. The betrayal was not from some anonymous foreign power, but from a member of your own clan. This added another layer to the treachery, a deeper, more personal sting that would make your future revenge all the more satisfying. This event solidifies your destiny in a chilling way. The Ottomans, ever the political opportunists, see a new opening. With your father and brother dead, and a Hungarian puppet on the Wallachian throne, they have the perfect tool for their own agenda. You are the rightful heir. You have the name, you have the bloodline, and you now have a powerful, unquenchable thirst for vengeance. Sultan Murad II, with a predatory glint in his eye, sees a young man with nothing left to lose. He sees a loyal son who is now a loyal subject. He promises you the Wallachian throne. All you have to do is take it. The deal is struck. The Sultan provides you with a contingent of Ottoman troops, men who are as ruthless as they are disciplined. They are not fighting for Wallachia. They are fighting for the Ottoman Empire, and you, Vlad, are their leader. You have no illusions about this. You are a pawn in a bigger game, a tool to destabilize a Hungarian allied state. But for the first time in years, you feel a surge of power, a sense of purpose. You're no longer a hostage, you're a prince, and you're going home. Your journey back to Wallachia is not a triumphant procession. It is a grim, determined march. You're not a liberator, you're an invader with a foreign army at your back. You trudge through the passes of the Carpathians, the crisp mountain air filling your lungs, the smell of your homeland a bittersweet reminder of all you have lost. You feel the weight of your father's and brother's deaths like a cloak on your shoulders. You see the faces of the boyars, their smug, treacherous smiles, and you make a silent vow. A vow that you will not just reclaim the throne, but that you will dismantle the very system that betrayed your family. You will not just rule, you will punish. As you near the capital, Târgoviște, you can almost taste the fear of the people. They see the Ottoman banners, the foreign soldiers, and they see a new tyranny approaching. They don't see their rightful prince coming to save them. They see the son of the dragon, returning on the back of his father's murderers. Historians still argue whether Vlad truly believed he could rule Wallachia as an independent state, while using Ottoman military force to take the throne. Was it a calculated risk? A masterful piece of political theatre? Or was it a sign of a naive young man, desperate for power and blinded by a need for revenge? The confrontation with Vladislav II is swift and brutal. Your Ottoman troops are superior in both numbers and discipline. Vladislav's forces, a hodgepodge of loyalists and mercenaries, are no match. The battle is a rout. Vladislav is captured and, in a final act of personal vengeance, you have him executed. The details of his death are lost to history, but the symbolism is not. A cousin for a brother, a throne for a grave. You have your kingdom back, but not for long. Your first reign is a fleeting moment, a brief, violent flash of triumph before the darkness descends again. You're on the throne for only a few short months. The Wallachian boyars, seeing the Ottoman presence as a greater threat than a Hungarian puppet, rally around Vladislav's brother, and with Hungarian backing they drive you out. You are forced to flee once again, a prince without a kingdom. You are a hunted man, a pariah in your own land. The taste of victory turns to ash in your mouth. You trudge through the snow-covered mountains, a small band of loyal followers at your back, the cold biting at your face. You're no longer a hostage, nor are you a prince. You are a fugitive, running from the very people you sought to rule. This period of your life is a blur of cold, hunger, and a gnawing sense of failure. But that bitterness, that cold fury you nursed in the Sultan's court, has not gone away. If anything, it has been sharpened to a razor's edge. You have seen the treacherous nature of power, the fleeting loyalty of men, and the brutal reality of what it takes to survive in this world. And you have learned your lesson. Next time, you tell yourself, things will be different. Next time, there will be no mercy. Your first reign is over almost before it begins, a short, brutal winter. You, Vlad, are once again an exile, a princeling with no principality. The taste of power, of justice served, turns to a bitter gall in your mouth. You trudge through the Carpathian mountains, a fugitive in the land you were born to rule. The cold gnaws at your bones, the wind howls a mocking lament, and you are left with nothing but the memory of your father's murder and your brother's cruel fate. The world has again shown you its fickle nature, its quickness to turn its back on those who dare to stand against the tide. You're a man without a home, a prince without a people, and the experience hardens you in a way that your gilded captivity could not. This time, there's no luxury, no comfort to cushion the blows. This is raw, unvarnished survival. You seek refuge, not with the Ottomans who failed to secure your throne, but with the Hungarians, the very people who had a hand in your family's demise. It seems a strange, almost unbelievable turn of events. But this is the brutal, pragmatic world of 15th century politics, where yesterday's enemy is today's only hope. John Hunyadi, the man who had installed Vladislav II, now sees you, Vlad, as a potential ally. He's a master tactician, and he understands the value of a prince with a personal vendetta against the Ottoman Empire. The boyars in Wallachia are still a problem, but they are a problem that can be dealt with. The bigger threat is the Ottomans, and you are the only man with the right name and the right level of personal hatred to be their perfect counterpunch. So you become Hunyadi's protégé. You're taken in, not as a son, but as a weapon. For 8 long years you live in the Hungarian court, learning the ways of a new kind of warfare, a new kind of politics. You're a student, a guest, and a pawn all at once. You're trained in the Hungarian military tradition, which is a far cry from the Ottoman methods you learned as a boy. You learn new strategies, new tactics, and you see firsthand the formidable power of a united Christian front against the Muslim threat. Hunyadi's trust in you is a fragile thing, built on mutual convenience rather than genuine affection. But you are a quick study. You learn what he teaches you, but you also learn the darker lessons. How to manipulate, how to scheme, how to hide your true intentions behind a mask of loyalty. The time you spend in Hungary is not just about military training, it's about observation. You watch Hunyadi deal with his own boyars, his own political rivals. You see how he consolidates power, how he rewards loyalty and punishes treachery. You see the subtle and not so subtle ways a ruler can maintain control over a fractured, fractious nobility. This is a crucial part of your education. You remember the boyars of Wallachia, the men who laughed as your brother was blinded, the men who drove you into exile. You remember their wealth, their arrogance, their defiance, and you make a new vow, a vow forged in the cold halls of the Hungarian court. You will not just punish them, you will utterly break them. A mainstream historical fact of this time is that Hunyadi, a man of immense personal prestige and military prowess, was instrumental in shaping you, Vlad, into the leader you would become. He was your mentor, your benefactor, and your guide. He saw your potential, your hunger, and he harnessed it. He gave you a platform, an army, and a cause. He saw a young man who had lost everything and who was willing to do anything to get it back. In a way, you're his creation. You're the product of his strategic genius and your own personal tragedy. This relationship between the master and his vengeful pupil is one of the most fascinating aspects of your story. In 1456, the moment arrives. John Hunyadi, sensing a renewed Ottoman push into Europe, and with a keen eye on the strategic importance of Wallachia, gives you the green light. You're to lead an army, a coalition of Hungarian and Wallachian forces to reclaim your throne, but this time it is different. This is not an Ottoman-led invasion. This is a Christian-backed crusade, a mission to liberate your people from the Hungarian allied puppet prince Vladislav II. The irony is thick enough to cut with a dagger. You're marching on your home, once again, to overthrow the very man who overthrew you. The march is swift. You're no longer a boy, but a man seasoned by war and political intrigue. You're no longer a puppet, but a prince with a mission. The battle is a bloody affair, a grim reenactment of your first failed attempt. Vladislav II, now a paranoid and unpopular ruler, is no match for your newfound military prowess. His forces are routed, his rule is brought to an abrupt and violent end. In a final act of retribution, you have him executed. The details of his death are a matter of historical debate. Some accounts claim you simply beheaded him, others whisper of a more gruesome, personalised end, but the outcome is clear. Vladislav II is gone, and you are once again the ruler of Wallachia. A quirky, almost overlooked detail of this second coup is the fact that John Hunyadi, your mentor, died of the plague just a few weeks after your victory. This sudden, unexpected death leaves you, Vlad, in a precarious position. Your strongest political ally, the man who put you on the throne, is gone. You're now a ruler with no powerful backing, surrounded by enemies and a nobility that hates and fears you in equal measure. This is a moment of profound vulnerability, a test of your mettle. Will you be able to hold on to power without Hunyadi's protection? Or will you be overthrown again, a victim of your own success? This is the point where you, Vlad, must step out of the shadows of your mentors and become a king in your own right. And you do. You don't just hold on to power, you seize it with both hands. You consolidate your rule with a ruthless efficiency that would make even Hunyadi proud. You begin a reign of terror, a systematic dismantling of the old order. You have witnessed the fickle nature of the boyars, their willingness to switch allegiances at a moment's notice, their blatant disregard for the well-being of the country, and you will not tolerate it. You see them as the murderers of your father and brother, the architects of your exile, and the source of all the instability in Wallachia. Historians still argue whether Vlad's actions against the boyars were a necessary evil for the sake of a unified, strong Wallachia, or simply an act of personal, unbridled revenge. Was he a patriot, a unifier who saw the nobility as a corrupting influence on his country? Or was he a sadist, a man so consumed by hatred that he would stop at nothing to get his pound of flesh? The answer, as with so many things in history, is likely a complex mixture of both. You are a man shaped by trauma and a desire for stability. You have witnessed the consequences of a weak ruler and a strong nobility, and you are determined to never be weak again. You begin to make your first moves. You issue decrees, centralize the government, and begin to build a standing army loyal only to you. You're not a king who rules from a safe distance. You're a prince who walks among his people, who oversees the construction of his castles, and who personally supervises the punishment of his enemies. You are everywhere, and you are feared. The boyars for the first time feel the cold hand of a power stronger than their own. They see a new prince, a man they remember as a boy, a pawn. But they are wrong. You are not a pawn. You are the dragon, and you have come home to burn. Now that you have your throne, a cold, hard stone beneath you, and a kingdom of treacherous nobles surrounding you, the real work begins. You are a prince, yes, but you are also a survivor of a brutal upbringing. The years spent in the Ottoman court were not a vacation. They were a finishing school in the dark arts of power. You remember those long nights, staring at the ceiling of your gilded cage, the whispers of the guards outside your door, and the casual cruelty you witnessed every day. You remember the fear in your heart, the gnawing feeling of being a helpless pawn in a game you didn't ask to play. This wasn't just a physical captivity. It was a psychological one, and it changed you. It twisted your perspective, warping your sense of justice and mercy into something altogether different. The first lesson you learned in that court, the most important one, was that power is not given. It is taken, and once taken, it must be held with an iron grip. Mercy is a weakness, an invitation for betrayal. Loyalty is a commodity, something to be bought with rewards or, more effectively, with fear. You saw this in the Sultan's court, in the way he dealt with his own rebellious subjects, and in the way he treated his enemies. You saw how a single, swift act of unimaginable cruelty could bring a whole province to its knees. This was not a lesson in compassion, it was a lesson in control. A mainstream historical fact that supports this is the contrast between your experience and that of your brother, Radu. Radu, as we touched on before, adapted to the Ottoman court with a shocking ease. He was charming, handsome, and quickly became a favourite of the Sultan's son, Mehmet II. He converted to Islam and was given positions of trust and power. He embraced his new life, his new identity. You, on the other hand, held onto your Wallachian identity like a shield, a constant, defiant refusal to bend. You saw the Ottomans as your captors, your brother as a traitor, and the boyars of your own country as the ultimate architects of your misery. Radu's path was one of assimilation and success. Yours was a path of resentment and revenge. This is the psychological heart of the matter. While Radu learned to make peace with his past, you learned to hate it. You saw your father's death and your brother Mircha's blinding, not just as a political event, but as a personal betrayal. The boyars weren't just a political class, they were the faces of your family's murderers. Their treachery was not a strategic move. It was a personal affront that could only be answered with personal, intimate revenge. This isn't just about ruling a country, it's about exorcising a demon, a memory so painful it has become a living thing inside you. A quirky detail that brings this period of your life into sharper focus is the training you received in both Ottoman and Hungarian military tactics. You're a man of two worlds, two schools of thought, and you will use both to your advantage. You learned the Ottoman art of psychological warfare, the use of terror to demoralize an enemy before a single arrow is fired. But you also learned the Hungarian art of strategic, disciplined warfare, the use of a standing army and a fortified castle to hold a border. You're a unique blend of these two worlds, a man who knows how to use both the sword and the mind as weapons. This duality, this mix of cultures and influences, is what makes you such a formidable and unpredictable force. The first thing you must address as the newly crowned Prince of Wallachia is the boyars. They are the same men who betrayed your father and brother, the same men who drove you into exile. They see you as a temporary ruler, a young upstart who can be manipulated and eventually overthrown just like your father. They are wrong. You are not your father. You are something new, something forged in fire and ice, and you have no intention of repeating his mistakes. Historians still argue whether Vlad's later actions were premeditated from the moment he took the throne, or whether they evolved out of a series of political necessities. Did he have a grand, ruthless plan from the very beginning, a master blueprint for revenge? Or did he simply react to the constant threats and betrayals that defined his reign, becoming more and more brutal with each passing year? It's a chicken or the egg kind of question, a debate that gets to the heart of whether you were a monster born or a monster made. You begin to observe them, these boyars. You watch them at court, their faces a mask of feigned loyalty and hidden contempt. You see them bickering over land, plotting in hushed corners, and giving you the kind of half-hearted obedience that screams of imminent rebellion. You remember them as boys, maybe, or as men who held your father in contempt, and you know, with a cold certainty, that they must be dealt with. Not just some of them, but all of them. The old order, the system that allowed them to betray a prince and murder his family, must be dismantled, brick by brick. Your years in captivity gave you a unique perspective on power. You saw that the Sultan didn't just rule his people, he owned them. He was not just a king, he was a god on earth. His word was law, and his will was absolute. There was no room for dissent, no room for treachery, no room for defiance. You saw a system where a single ruler, with a loyal army and a unified people, could hold back the tide of history. You saw the strength of a centralized government, and you saw the weakness of a feudal system built on the shifting sands of noble alliances. And you decided, with a chilling clarity, that Wallachia would no longer be a feudal system. It would be an absolute monarchy. Your mind, honed by years of observation and fueled by a deep-seated desire for vengeance, begins to form a plan. It is a plan of consolidation, of retribution, and of terror. You will not simply punish the boyars. You will use them to build your new Wallachian state. You will take their power, their lands, their lives, and you will build something new out of the ashes. You're not just a prince, you are a force of nature, and the storm is coming. The Boyars, in their arrogance, in their complacency, have no idea what is about to be unleashed upon them. They see you as a puppet, a boy, but you are no longer a boy, you are a dragon, and you are about to breathe fire. The cold winter of your return has thawed into a spring of simmering tension. You are on the throne, yes, but it is a throne built on the shaky foundations of Hungarian military support, and a Boyar class that despises you. You're acutely aware of the knives that are out there, not just in the dark corners of your court, but in the very hands of the men who bend a knee to you. You see their feigned loyalty, the smiles that don't reach their eyes, and the barely concealed contempt in their every gesture. They are the same men who let your father and brother die, and they are waiting for you to fail. They see you as a temporary annoyance, a young prince to be replaced when the political winds shift again. You know, with a chilling certainty, that you cannot rule with them. You must rule over them, and in order to do that, you must first break their power, their spirit and their influence. You begin with a subtle approach, a test of their loyalty. You summon them to court, all the great Boyars of Wallachia, under the pretense of a great council. You listen to their grievances, their complaints about the state of the country, and their thinly veiled boasts about their own power and influence. You nod along, feigning concern, and you allow them to believe that you are a malleable young prince, willing to listen to their wise counsel. This is a crucial first step. You're allowing them to reveal their true nature, to show you the full extent of their arrogance and their disrespect. You are a spider, and you are waiting for them to walk into your web. A mainstream historical fact of this period is that Vlad's primary goal was to centralize power and eliminate the perpetual threat of internal strife. Wallachia had long been a plaything of its powerful neighbours, and its own nobility, the Boyars, were notorious for their shifting allegiances. They would support one prince one year and overthrow him the next, depending on who was offering the better deal. This constant political instability made Wallachia a weak and easy target. You, Vlad, understood this with a clarity that none of your predecessors had. You knew that a strong Wallachia could only be built on the bones of its treacherous nobility. You couldn't fight a war with an army that might abandon you on the battlefield, or rule a country with a court that was actively plotting your demise. The Great Purge of the Boyars, as it would come to be known, was not a single event, but a series of calculated, brutal actions. You began by targeting the most defiant, the most powerful of the Boyar families. You used their own laws against them, finding pretext for treason, for corruption, for disloyalty. You did not, at first, resort to the gruesome spectacles that would later become your trademark. You used the tools of the state, trials, confiscations, exiles. But this was just a warm-up. You were testing the waters, seeing how far you could push before they pushed back. And they didn't. They were too confident, too complacent, too convinced of their own untouchability. A quirky detail from this time is the fact that you often used a system of spies and informers to gather information on the Boyars. These were not noblemen or court officials, but common people, merchants, priests, and even peasants, who owed you a great deal of loyalty, either through fear or genuine respect. They would bring you tales of the Boyars' secret meetings, their disloyal conversations, and their plans to overthrow you. This was a direct subversion of the traditional power structure, where a prince was expected to rely on his nobles for information. You, Vlad, were creating a new kind of intelligence network, one that was loyal only to you and that gave you an unfiltered and terrifyingly accurate picture of the political landscape. You remember the fate of your brother Mircea, the Boyar's cruelty, the red-hot stakes and the fresh grave. You remember the shame of your father, his betrayal at the hands of his own nobles. This isn't just about politics anymore. This is personal. You're not just a prince. You are the instrument of their reckoning. You are their justice. You are their punishment. And you begin to lay the groundwork for your most infamous act of revenge. Historians still argue whether the Boyar Purge was the result of a long-term strategic plan or a reactive response to a specific threat. Was there a particular plot you uncovered, a particular act of treason that finally pushed you over the edge? Or was it simply the culmination of all the years of pain and betrayal, a slow, burning fuse that finally reached its explosive conclusion? It's a debate that gets to the heart of your motivations. Were you a calculating strategist or a man consumed by a desire for vengeance? The answer as with so many things about you, is likely a mix of both. You continue to consolidate your power, moving from the political to the personal. You begin to replace the old boyars with men of your own choosing, men who owe their entire position and fortune to you. These are not noblemen from ancient families. These are common men, men who have proven their loyalty on the battlefield, or who have served you faithfully in other capacities. You're creating a new class of nobility, a new power structure, one that is loyal only to you, the prince, and not to some ancient corrupt family line. This new class of nobility, your new men, as they were called, were instrumental in your rise to absolute power. They were your eyes, your ears, and your enforcers. They were the ones who would carry out your orders without question, who would prosecute the boyars in your name, and who would build the foundations of your new Wallachia. This was a brilliant move, a piece of political chess that outmaneuvered the boyars at every turn. They expected a prince who would rely on them. They got a prince who would replace them. The final act of the purge, the most infamous one, is yet to come. You're not a man to act impulsively. You are a man who plans, who plots, and who waits for the perfect moment to strike, and the perfect moment, you decide, will be a grand feast, a celebration of your reign, a moment where the boyars will be at their most complacent, their most arrogant. This will be the moment you reveal your true nature, the moment you shed the mask of the patient prince and become the dragon they all secretly feared. The stage is set, the guests are invited, and the reckoning is about to begin. The stage is set. You, Vlad, a prince with a memory of fire and a thirst for vengeance, have invited the old boyar families to a great feast at the royal court in Targoviste. The air is thick with anticipation, the sounds of laughter and music filling the grand hall. The boyars, resplendent in their finest furs and velvets, drink deeply from your wine and feast on your roasted meats. They feel secure. They are in the heart of the kingdom, surrounded by their peers, and they believe they have the measure of you. They see a young man who has returned from exile, a man who they believe has come to heal. They are wrong. This feast is not a celebration. It is a trap. You, Vlad, are a hunter, and these arrogant, plotting men are your prey. As the food and drink flow, you rise from your chair, the clatter of cutlery and the murmur of conversation falling silent. Your voice, which has been soft and diplomatic throughout the evening, now takes on a hard, resonant quality. You turn to the oldest boyar at the table, a man who has served under your father and your cousin, a man whose face holds the smug confidence of a survivor. You ask him a simple question, a question that will shatter their complacency. "Tell me," you begin, your voice low and dangerous, "how many princes have you served in your long life?" The boyar, a bit tipsy and full of bravado, laughs and begins to count them on his fingers. 4, he says, a smirk on his face. "No, 5. Yes, 5 princes of Wallachia, and soon, with you, a 6th. He says this with an air of self-importance, as if his constant shifting of loyalty were a mark of wisdom, not of treachery. You let the silence hang in the air, the boyar's words echoing in the sudden quiet of the hall. You then turn to the other boyars, and you ask them the same question. The answers are all similar: 3, 4, even 5 princes. They do not realize in their arrogance that they are confessing to a crime. They are not loyal servants of the crown. They are political chameleons, men who would sell their prince for a better title or a piece of land. This is the mainstream historical fact of the Easter Feast massacre, a pivotal event in your reign. The accounts of this event vary, but the core of the story remains the same. You used the boyars' own history against them. You brought them all together under one roof, and you exposed their treachery to their faces. This was not a random act of violence. It was a theatrical, symbolic display of your new absolute power. You were showing them, and everyone in Wallachia, that the old ways of perpetual disloyalty were over. After you have extracted their confessions, the atmosphere in the hall shifts from one of merriment to one of icy dread. The boyars, now sober, begin to understand the true nature of the feast. They see the silent guards at the doors, the cold glint in your eyes, and they know, with a sudden sickening certainty, that they have walked into a trap. And then you deliver the punishment. You don't kill them all at once. That would be too quick, too merciful. You separate them. The older boyars, the ones who had served multiple princes, are to be executed on the spot. Their deaths are brutal, a quick, bloody end to their long, treacherous lives. The younger boyars, the ones who had not yet had a chance to fully betray a prince, are given a different fate. You have a task for them, a long, arduous and punishing task that will test their resolve and break their spirit. A quirky detail that is often overlooked in this story is the role of the turban. As some accounts tell it, at the feast, you noticed that the boyars were wearing their turbans, a form of head covering while at court. This was an Ottoman custom that had seeped into Wallachian high society, a symbol of their willingness to adopt foreign ways, even from their greatest enemy. You, a man who had resisted the Ottomans at every turn, saw this as a final, unforgivable insult. As part of their punishment, you allegedly ordered the turbans to be nailed to their heads, a symbolic and brutal rejection of both their disloyalty and their embrace of foreign customs. This act, whether a historical fact or a later embellishment, speaks volumes about your mindset. It was not just about punishing treachery. It was about purifying Wallachian society from foreign influence and making a powerful, visceral statement about your rule. The younger boyars, those who were spared immediate death, were given a task that would prove to be a more lingering, torturous punishment. You marched them out of the city, through the snow-covered mountains to the ruins of an old fortress. The trek itself is grueling, a test of their pampered bodies and delicate constitutions. They trudge through the mud and the slush, their fine clothes torn, their hands and feet frozen. This is their punishment. This is their penance. They are no longer the great lords of Wallachia. They are forced labourers, building your monument. The monument is Ponari Castle, an old dilapidated fortress nestled high in the mountains. Your father had begun to build it, but had never finished. Now you would finish it. You would build it with the forced labour of the very men who had betrayed him. This is the ultimate act of poetic justice. They will build the fortress that will stand as a testament to your rule, and their bones will be its foundation. Historians still argue whether the Easter Feast massacre was a single bloody event or a conflation of several smaller purges. Was it a planned, strategic move to eliminate a political threat, or a moment of unbridled rage and vengeance? The truth, as is often the case with history, is likely somewhere in the middle. You were a man of deep personal convictions, and you were a ruler who understood the need for absolute power. The Easter Feast was the perfect blend of both. It was an act of personal revenge and a political masterstroke, a warning to all who would dare to defy you. The boyars, now reduced to a shadow of their former selves, worked tirelessly in the cold, unforgiving mountains. Their hands, once accustomed to the softness of fine leather and the weight of a signet ring, now know the coarse feel of stone and the sting of frostbite. They are building your castle, your home, your impenetrable fortress. They are your new nobility, a class of men who have learned their lesson, a lesson paid for in blood, sweat and stone. They will not forget their punishment, and Wallachia, for the first time in a long time, will know the meaning of the word loyalty. Because loyalty, in your new kingdom, is not a choice. It is a necessity for survival. The wind howls through the desolate mountain pass, a mournful song that carries the sounds of labour and suffering. You, Vlad, stand on a rocky precipice, your silhouette a dark and unforgiving shape against the pale sky. Below you, a line of men, once the proud and powerful boyars of Wallachia, trudge through the mud, their hands blistered, their backs bent under the weight of heavy stones. Their fine velvets and furs are now tattered rags, their soft shoes replaced by crude leather boots that offer little protection from the cold. They are building your monument, your home, your fortress. They are building Ponari Castle. This is not a simple construction project. It is a carefully orchestrated act of psychological torment and symbolic justice. The boyars, you remind yourself, were the architects of your family's destruction. They were the ones who saw your father's rule as an inconvenience, a temporary obstacle to their own power. They were the ones who laughed as your brother was blinded and buried alive. Now they are the ones who will build your home with their own hands, a constant physical reminder of their treachery and your absolute power. A mainstream historical fact about Ponari Castle is its strategic importance. It was an old, dilapidated fortress perched on a cliffside, offering an almost impregnable position. By forcing the boyars to rebuild and expand it, you, Vlad, were not just punishing them. You were also creating a new seat of power, a symbol of your absolute authority. This was a direct contrast to the traditional seat of power in Torqueviste, which was easily accessible and vulnerable to attack. Ponari, a fortress of your own making, would become your personal refuge. a place where you could be safe from the knives and plots of your enemies, both internal and external. The work is brutal and unforgiving. The boyars, accustomed to a life of luxury and leisure, are now working from dawn until dusk, their bodies pushed to the breaking point. Many of them die from exhaustion, from accidents, or from the sheer cold. You, Vlad, do not care. To you their deaths are not a tragedy, but a necessary consequence. Each fallen boyar is a testament to the old ways, a piece of the past that must be cleared away to make room for the new. You're not a merciful ruler, you're a ruthless pragmatist. You're building a nation, and sometimes a nation must be built on a foundation of pain. A quirky detail about the construction of Poenari is that, according to some legends, you, Vlad, would often personally oversee the work. You would walk among the boyars, your presence a constant reminder of their fate. You would not speak, but your eyes would be on them, your silent gaze a more potent whip than any overseer's lash. The fear of your displeasure, the constant threat of a harsher punishment, was the real fuel that drove them. This personal supervision, this direct involvement in the punishment of your enemies, is a key part of your character. You're not a king who rules from a distant throne. You're a prince who gets his hands dirty. As the castle begins to take shape, rising from the rocky cliffside like a jagged tooth, the boyars begin to understand the full weight of their punishment. They are not just building a castle, they are building their own prison. They are building a monument to their own demise. Their names, once a source of pride and power, are now nothing but a memory, buried under the heavy stones they are forced to carry. You are not just punishing their disloyalty, you are erasing their very existence. Historians still argue whether the story of the Poenari Castle's construction is a literal account or a powerful metaphor for Vlad's destruction of the old boyar class. Was it a single, massive forced labour project? Or was it a series of smaller punishments, a constant, ongoing attrition of the old nobility? The truth is likely a combination of both. You, Vlad, were a master of propaganda and psychological warfare. The story of Poenari, whether entirely true or a powerful embellishment, served its purpose. It was a clear and unambiguous message to all who would dare to defy you. Your punishment would be both physical and symbolic, a fate that would break your body and your name. As the years of your reign pass, you continue to consolidate your power. The old boyar class is a thing of the past, replaced by a new nobility loyal only to you. You have a standing army, a centralized government, and a powerful fortress from which to rule. You have built a strong, unified Wallachia, a nation that can now stand on its own 2 feet against the powerful empires that surround it. But you have also made a nation that is ruled by fear. Your name, once a simple family name, is now a word whispered in the dark, a word that strikes terror into the hearts of your enemies and your subjects alike. The construction of Poenari Castle is not just the end of the boyars, it is the beginning of the Impaler. The boyars, in their final act, have given you a throne and a fortress. They have given you a kingdom built on their pain and suffering. But they have also given you a new name, a new legacy, a legacy that will forever be associated with unimaginable cruelty. The stones of Poenari are a testament to your power, but they are also a tombstone for your soul. You have won, yes, but you have also lost something in the process, something that you will never get back. And as you stand on that precipice, looking down at the men who built your home, you feel a cold emptiness inside. The boyars are gone, and now you must deal with the rest of the world. A world that, you know, will not take kindly to a ruler who builds his castles with the forced labour of his own people. With your new castle standing like a sentinel on the mountain, and a new class of loyal boyars serving at your pleasure, you feel a kind of grim satisfaction. You have dismantled the old corrupt order. You have avenged your father and your brother. But the real work, you know, has just begun. The boyars, for all their treachery, were just a symptom of a larger problem. The true challenge lies in asserting your will not just on your own people, but on the world beyond your borders. And for that you need a new tool, a new kind of power, a signature of your reign that will be so terrifying, so unforgettable, that it will make all who hear of it tremble. This, you decide, will be the power of fear. You have seen the power of fear firsthand, a lesson learned in the court of the Sultan. You saw how a single act of violence, a public execution, a brutal punishment, could instill a level of obedience that no amount of diplomacy or negotiation could ever achieve. The Ottomans, you recall, were masters of this. They would display the heads of their enemies on pikes outside their castles, a grim warning to all who would dare to defy them. You, Vlad, decide to take this one step further. You will not just display the heads of your enemies, you will display their entire bodies, and you will do it in a way that is so slow, so agonizing, so utterly dehumanizing, that it will become a legend in its own time. The method you choose is impalement. A mainstream historical fact is that impalement was not your invention. It was a form of execution used by various cultures throughout history, including the Ottomans themselves. You, however, perfected it. You turned it from a simple form of execution into an art form of terror. You took a barbaric punishment and elevated it to a theatrical spectacle, a public service announcement of what would happen to anyone who dared to cross you. This was your signature, your calling card, the act that would forever define your legacy. Imagine the scene, if you can, through the eyes of a peasant, a merchant, or a foreign dignitary arriving at one of your cities. You would see a great field, a forest of sharpened stakes. Each stake, you would notice with a shiver, is carefully tapered, its point not a needle-sharp spike, but a blunt, rounded tip. This is not a mistake. It is a meticulous detail. A sharp spike would kill a man too quickly. A blunt stake would not. The blunt stake would be carefully inserted into the body, and the victim, as they slid down, would be impaled, not through a single point, but along the length of their torso. The process, you would realize with a horrifying clarity, was designed to be as slow and as painful as possible. The stakes themselves would be of varying heights, arranged in a way that suggested some kind of grim hierarchy. The leaders, the traitors, the most defiant of your enemies would be on the tallest stakes, a testament to their own importance and your particular displeasure. The lesser criminals, the petty thieves, the tax evaders, would be on shorter stakes, a reminder that even the smallest infraction would not go unpunished. The overall effect, you would see, was a kind of macabre forest, a landscape of suffering and death that would stretch for miles. A quirky detail that historians have often pointed to is the meticulous, almost bureaucratic nature of your cruelty. You did not just order the impalement, you personally oversaw it. You would often have your meals served outside, in sight of the suffering victims. You would watch, and you would wait, sometimes for days, for the death of your enemies. This was not a random act of rage, it was a cold, calculated exercise in control. You were sending a message that was not just about the finality of death, but about the agonizing slowness of it. You were showing the world that you, Vlad, were a man who had the time and the patience to watch his enemies die, slowly, one by one. Historians still argue whether Vlad's use of impalement was a truly novel tactic or simply a brutal escalation of existing practices. Was he a pioneer of psychological warfare, a genius who understood the power of terror to control a population? Or was he simply a sadistic man who found a new and more gruesome way to kill his enemies? The answer, as with so many things in your story, is likely a complex mixture of both. You were a man of your time, a time of brutal punishments and constant warfare. But you were also a man with a singular personal vision, a vision of a Wallachia ruled not by the old weak laws of your father, but by the new terrifying laws of the Impaler. Your victims were not just the boyars, but also merchants who tried to cheat on their taxes, peasants who tried to steal, and even foreign diplomats who dared to insult you. You were a man of absolute justice, a justice that was brutal, swift, and completely unforgiving. You did not believe in second chances. You did not believe in mercy. You believed in a simple, terrifying truth. The only way to ensure loyalty was to make the cost of disloyalty unimaginably high. And it worked. The stories of your cruelty, of the forest of the impaled, began to spread like wildfire. Peasants learned to fear your tax collectors more than they feared the devil. Merchants learned to pay their dues on time, and foreign dignitaries learned to watch their words, to tread carefully, to never ever cross the Prince of Wallachia. Your kingdom, for the first time in its history, was a place of law and order. The thieves were gone, the corrupt officials were gone, and the treacherous boyars were gone. But in their place was a new kind of silence, a new kind of fear, a fear that was so deep, so pervasive, that it would seep into the very soil of Wallachia and become a part of its identity. The whispers you knew would follow you to your grave, and you, Vlad, were fine with that. Because in those whispers, in those stories of terror, was a kind of immortality, a legacy that no other prince, no other king could ever hope to achieve. The Forest of the Impaled. The name itself is a whisper, a shiver down the spine of anyone who has heard the stories. You, Vlad, have not just created a method of execution. You have created a piece of art, a psychological weapon that is more potent than any army. This is your masterpiece. This is your legacy. And it stands as a testament to the power of pure, unadulterated terror. The world outside Wallachia, the great powers of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire are beginning to take notice. The stories, embellished and exaggerated with each telling, are now a part of the European consciousness. They speak of a prince who dines among the dead, a man whose smile is as cold as a winter's wind, a ruler who has turned his entire kingdom into a living, breathing warning. This psychological warfare is a mainstream historical fact of your reign. You understood, with an almost genius-like clarity, that an army's morale could be broken not just with a sword, but with a horrifying image. A man who sees a forest of his countrymen impaled, their bodies twisted and contorted in their final agony, is a man who will not fight. He is a man who will flee. And a ruler who uses this tactic is a ruler who doesn't need to win a battle to win a war. You're not just a military leader, you are a master of terror. The most famous example of this is the story of the Ottoman army's march on Târgoviște. Sultan Mehmet II, the conqueror of Constantinople, a man of immense power and a deep personal hatred for you, leads a massive army into Wallachia. His goal is simple: to overthrow you, to install your brother, Radu, on the throne, and to bring Wallachia back into the Ottoman fold. The Sultan expects a battle, a glorious war, a chance to show off his military might. What he gets is a nightmare. Your strategy is one of scorched earth. You order your people to abandon their villages, to flee into the mountains, to leave nothing behind. They burn their crops, poison their wells, and drive their livestock with them. The Ottoman army, a massive lumbering force, marches into a ghost land. There is no food, no water, no resistance. The countryside is an empty, silent wasteland. This is a brilliant tactic, a strategic withdrawal that denies the enemy the very resources they need to survive. But this is just the beginning. The real horror begins as the Ottoman army nears Târgoviște. The soldiers, tired and hungry, are expecting to find a city to sack, a prince to fight. Instead, they find a forest that is not made of trees. Imagine the scene through the eyes of a weary Ottoman soldier. You are marching, your boots kicking up the dust, the sun beating down on your helmet. The air is heavy and the silence is deafening. Then you smell it. A stench that is unlike anything you have ever smelled before. A foul, cloying smell of death and decay. And then you see it. The Forest of the Impaled. The sight is so shocking, so utterly gruesome, that it brings the entire army to a halt. There, in a field that stretches for miles, are tens of thousands of impaled bodies, men, women, and even children. Their bodies are twisted and contorted in their final agonizing death throes. The carrion birds circle in the sky, their cries a grim soundtrack to the scene. And at the centre of it all, on the tallest stakes, are the bodies of captured Ottoman soldiers, men you know, men you fought with, their faces frozen in a mask of silent terror. This is not a battle. This is a spectacle. This is a message. You, Vlad, are standing on the parapets of your castle, watching the Ottoman army's reaction. You know, with a cold certainty, that you have won. The Sultan, a man who has conquered cities and broken armies, is so horrified by the sight that he turns his army around and retreats. He has not lost a battle, but he has lost his nerve. He has seen the true face of his enemy, and it is a face he never wants to see again. A quirky detail that is often forgotten in this story is that the Sultan's army was not just made up of hardened Ottoman soldiers. It also contained Greek, Serbian, and even Wallachian contingents. These men, many of them Christian, were fighting for the Ottoman Empire out of necessity or political allegiance. You, Vlad, in your wisdom, made no distinction between them. The Impaled were not just your enemies, they were a mix of all the peoples of the region. This was a clear message to all of Christendom. If you ally with the devil, you will suffer the devil's fate. It was a brutal but effective piece of propaganda. Historians still argue whether the number of impaled victims was truly in the tens of thousands. Was it a real, literal number, Or was it a form of psychological warfare in itself, an exaggeration designed to strike fear into the hearts of the Ottomans? The accounts from the time are conflicting, but the end result is not. The Ottoman army, for whatever reason, retreated. They did not conquer Wallachia. They did not depose you. They saw your forest of the impaled, and they were so terrified by it that they turned around and went home. The image, whether based on 10,000 victims or 100, was enough. The forest of the impaled is not just a story of terror. It is a story of survival. You, Vlad, a small prince in a small country, are able to defeat one of the most powerful empires on earth, not with an army, but with an image. You have turned the weakness of your position into a strength. You have taken the one thing they did not have, the one thing they did not understand, unrelenting theatrical cruelty, and you have used it to save your country. As the years pass, the stories of your cruelty grow. You're no longer just Vlad the Prince. You are now Vlad the Impaler. The name is a brand, a mark of fear that will forever be associated with you. The legends of your reign, of your dark justice, will spread throughout Europe, carried by merchants, diplomats and refugees. You are a monster, yes, but you are also a hero to your people, who in their own way have been saved by your cruelty. They are safe from the Ottomans, from the Hungarians, and from the treacherous Boyars. They are living in a kingdom of fear, but it is a kingdom that is, for the first time in a long time, free. The stench of the impaled has finally faded. The carrion birds have moved on, and a tense quiet has settled over Wallachia. The Sultan has retreated, your brother Radu has been sent back to the safety of the Ottoman court, and you, Vlad, are once again on your throne. Your victory, won not with a sword but with a chilling display of psychological terror, has cemented your position as the most feared ruler in all of Eastern Europe. But a kingdom cannot be ruled by terror alone. It must also have an economy, a system of law, and a way to deal with the outside world. And in this, you're just as ruthless and calculating as you are on the battlefield. Your next target is the Saxon merchants of Transylvania, the wealthy German traders who had long enjoyed a privileged position in the region. They were, in many ways, a law unto themselves, a powerful economic force that often ignored the laws of Wallachia and operated with a sense of impunity. They were the kind of people who would pay a bribe to a boyar to get out of a tax, or who would smuggle goods across your borders without a care in the world. They were, in short, a challenge to your absolute authority. And you, Vlad, were not a man who tolerated challenges. The mainstream historical fact here is that your conflict with the Transylvanian Saxons was not a personal vendetta, but a calculated effort to centralize the economy of Wallachia. For years, the Saxons had been granted special trading privileges by previous rulers, which allowed them to bypass your authority and trade freely. This hurt your treasury, undermined your power, and gave them a level of independence that you found unacceptable. You, in your wisdom, saw that a strong Wallachia needed a strong central economy, one that you could control, and the first step in that was to bring the Saxons to heel. You began with diplomacy of a sort. You sent envoys to the Saxon towns, demanding that they adhere to Wallachian laws and pay the proper taxes on their goods. They, in their arrogance, refused. They had dealt with weak Wallachian princes before, and they saw no reason to change their ways now. They believed they were untouchable, protected by their wealth and the distance of their towns. They were, of course, wrong. Your response was swift and brutal. You led an army into Transylvania not to conquer it, but to punish it. You did not engage in a grand battle. You engaged in a campaign of terror. You sacked the towns, burned the villages, and took the Saxon merchants captive. And you, as was your custom, impaled them. The stories of your cruelty against the Saxons are some of the most horrifying of your reign. One particularly famous tale, a quirky detail that has been passed down through history, is that of the impalement of the merchants of Brasov. After a raid, you captured a large number of them, and, in a public square, you had them impaled. And then, according to the accounts, you had a feast in the square, a banquet of roasted meat and fine wine, as the men died slowly around you. You did this not just for your own grim satisfaction, but as a message. You were showing the world, and especially the other Saxon towns, that you were not a man to be trifled with. You were showing them that your laws were not a suggestion, they were a command, and the punishment for disobedience was swift and terrible. Historians still argue whether Vlad's actions against the Saxons were an act of economic genius, or simply an act of unbridled cruelty? Was he a visionary who understood the need for a centralized economy, or was he a monster who used a political dispute as an excuse for an act of pure sadism? The truth, as with all things, is likely in the middle. You were a man of your time, a time when economic disputes were often settled with a sword, and you were a man with a particular flair for the dramatic. You understood that a single, shocking act of violence could achieve more than 100 years of diplomatic wrangling. You were not a subtle man. You were a man who believed in clear, unambiguous communication. The result of your campaign against the Saxons was a kind of grim peace. The remaining Saxon towns, seeing the fate of their countrymen, quickly came to terms. They agreed to pay your taxes, to follow your laws, and to submit to your authority. They had learned their lesson. The trade routes, which had once been a source of wealth and independence for them, were now a source of profit and power for you. You had, in a single, brutal campaign, brought an entire economic class to its knees. This was not just about economics, of course. It was also about politics. The Saxons, as a German-speaking minority, often had close ties to the Hungarian crown. By punishing them, you were also sending a clear message to your nominal overlord, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. You were showing him that you were not his puppet, that you were not his pawn. You were an independent ruler, a man who would do what he had to do to protect the interests of Wallachia, even if that meant going against the interests of his most powerful ally. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen, the obscure historical detail we mentioned earlier? You're learning that your history is full of these small, bizarre, and often disturbing tidbits. The world of Vlad the Impaler is not a world of clean, simple facts. It is a world of blood and mud and a twisted, terrifying kind of logic. You're seeing that the hero of one story is often the villain of another. To your people, you're a strong, decisive ruler who is protecting them from foreign encroachment. To the Saxons, you are a monster, a fiend who is killing them for a few extra coins. Both stories you are learning are true. As your reputation grows, so does your power. The stories of your cruelty, of your unwavering commitment to justice, have reached the far corners of Europe. You're a boogeyman, a nightmare, a legend. And you're also a ruler who has brought a kind of order to a chaotic world. The highways of Wallachia are safe from bandits, the courts are free of corruption, the taxes are paid on time, and the people, in their own way, are prospering. But they are prospering under the shadow of your reign, a reign that is defined not by love, but by fear. And you, Vlad, in your grim, unforgiving wisdom, know that for a man in your position, fear is a far more reliable tool than love. The echoes of the Saxon merchants' screams have faded, replaced by the hushed whispers of the international community. Your reputation, a grim tapestry woven with tales of impalement and unyielding justice, now precedes you. Your fame, or infamy, has reached the ears of the Pope, the kings of Europe, and the great Sultan himself. You're no longer just the Prince of Wallachia. You're a symbol, a lightning rod for both fear and admiration. And it is in this strange new reality that you begin to engage in a new kind of game, one not of the sword but of the cross. Your relationship with the church is complex, to say the least. On the one hand, you're a devout Orthodox Christian, a man who sees himself as a bulwark against the encroaching tide of the Muslim Ottoman Empire. On the other hand, you are a man who has ordered the impalement of priests, the burning of churches, and the casual murder of men, women, and children. You're a walking contradiction, a paradox of faith and brutality, and the church, in its own political and pragmatic way, is forced to deal with you. A mainstream historical fact of this period is that Pope Pius II, the head of the Catholic Church, saw you, Vlad, as a valuable ally in his long-held dream of a new crusade against the Ottomans. To him, your atrocities were not a sign of madness, but a sign of a zealot's devotion. You were a Christian ruler who was fighting a brutal war against the enemies of Christendom, and for that he was willing to overlook your more eccentric methods. He sent you envoys, gifts, and most importantly, money. He saw you not as a monster, but as a weapon, a tool to be used in the name of God. Imagine the scene, a papal envoy arriving at your court in Târgoviște. He is a man of God, a scholar, and a diplomat, a man who has travelled from the heart of Rome to the wild, brutal frontier of Wallachia. He is expecting to meet a prince, a fellow Christian monarch, but he is met with something else entirely. He is met with you, Vlad, a man with a cold stare, a silent fury simmering just beneath the surface. He is a man who is used to the pomp and circumstance of the Vatican, and he is now in a kingdom where the whispers of impalement are as common as the sound of the wind. The envoy, a man named Nicholas of Madrusa, arrives with a simple mission: to secure your allegiance for the Pope's crusade and to ask for a full account of your actions. He is a man of God, and he is hoping to find some kind of a spiritual, moral reason for your cruelty. He is hoping to find a man who, in his own twisted way, is fighting a holy war. He finds a man who sees cruelty not as a sin, but as a tool of governance, of justice, and of survival. A quirky detail that is often overlooked in this part of your story is the fact that you, Vlad, were a master of propaganda. You understood that the stories of your cruelty, as horrifying as they were, could also be a source of strength. You would often send letters to the Pope and other European rulers, detailing your victories against the Ottomans, and in a chillingly detached way, describing your punishments of their prisoners. These letters were not meant to shock them, but to show them that you were a ruler who was doing what was necessary. You were showing them that you were the kind of man you needed to be in order to stand against the might of the Ottoman Empire. You were saying, in effect, you may not like my methods, but you need my results. Historians still argue whether Vlad's use of religion was a sincere expression of faith or a cynical political tool. Did he truly believe he was a defender of Christendom, a sword of God against the infidels? Or was he simply a shrewd politician who understood that the best way to get money and support from the Pope was to present himself as a holy warrior? The answer, as is so often the case, is likely a mix of both. You were a man of your time, a man of faith, but you were also a man of war, a man who understood that in the grand game of international politics, the ends often justified the means. The papal envoy, Nicholas, writes back to the Pope with a strange mixture of admiration and horror. He tells the Pope of your victories, of your unwavering commitment to fighting the Ottomans, but he also tells him of your cruelty, of the forest of the impaled, of the stories of your feasts and your punishments. He describes a man who is both a hero and a monster, a man who is both a saint and a devil. The Pope, a pragmatist to the last, reads the report and comes to a simple conclusion. The man is a monster, but he is our monster. The support, the money, and the political backing for your war against the Ottomans would continue. Your relationship with the Church is a perfect example of your ability to manipulate the world around you. You're able to get the support you need, not by being a good Christian, but by being an effective one. You're not a man who lives by the rules of the Church. You're a man who bends the rules of the Church to your will. You are a man who understands that in the grand scheme of things, a few impaled enemies are a small price to pay for the survival of Christendom. And as you continue your war against the Ottomans, you're not just fighting for your country. You are fighting for your faith, for your legacy, and for your name. You're Vlad the Impaler, the defender of Christendom, the scourge of the Ottomans, the man who would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect his kingdom. And the world, in its own way, is beginning to both fear and respect you. Your name, once a symbol of your father's name, is now a symbol of your own, a name that will echo through the ages, a name that will be remembered not for its piety, but for its power. With the Pope's tacit blessing and the Hungarian crown's begrudging support, you, Vlad, now stand on the precipice of your greatest and most defining conflict. The whispers from the south have grown into a roar, the tramp of 1,000 hooves a prelude to a storm. Sultan Mehmet II, the conqueror of Constantinople, the man who had turned his back on your forest of the impaled, is no longer willing to tolerate your insolence. You have refused to pay tribute, you have raided his borders, and you have, in a series of audacious and terrifying acts, killed his emissaries. The time for diplomacy is over. The time for war has begun. Your war with the Ottoman Empire is not just a military conflict. It is a clash of civilizations, a personal vendetta, and a testament to the sheer, unbridled audacity of a single man. You, Vlad, are a prince of a small, poor country, facing down the might of the most powerful empire in the world. Mehmet II's army is a force of 100,000 men, a seemingly endless tide of disciplined janissaries, fierce cavalry, and an impressive array of siege weaponry. Your army, by contrast, is a small, ragtag force of peasants, mercenaries, and loyal boyars, a force that numbers in the tens of thousands at best. On paper, this is a war you cannot win. But you, Vlad, have never been a man who plays by the rules on paper. A mainstream historical fact of this conflict is that you, Vlad, employed a brilliant and brutal strategy of guerrilla warfare. You did not meet the Ottoman army in a grand open-field battle. That would have been suicide. Instead, you used the very land of Wallachia as your weapon. You employed a scorched earth policy, burning everything in the path of the Ottoman army, poisoning wells, and leaving nothing but a desolate, empty wasteland. The Ottoman army, a massive logistical machine that relied on foraging from the land, was slowly starved and demoralized. You turned the very land that you were fighting for into your greatest ally and their greatest enemy. Imagine yourself, a single Wallachian soldier, part of your small, fast-moving army. You're not a professional warrior, but a peasant, a farmer, a man who has taken up a sword to defend his home. You're not fighting a glorious war of honor. You're fighting a war of attrition, a war of shadows and whispers. You strike at the Ottoman army when they are at their weakest, at night, in the mountains, in the forests. You ambush their supply lines, you raid their camps, and you disappear back into the wilderness before they can even mount a response. This is not a war of pitched battles. It is a war of 1,000 cuts, a war that is slowly bleeding the great Ottoman army to death. A quirky detail that has been passed down through the ages is the story of your use of a plague-ridden battlefield. As the Ottoman army marched through a particularly desolate part of the country, they came across a field filled with the bodies of men, women and animals. You had, according to the legend, intentionally placed the plague-ridden bodies there, hoping to spread the disease among the Ottoman ranks. This was a dark and twisted form of biological warfare, a move so audacious and so terrifying that it speaks volumes about your mindset. You were not a man who played by the rules of chivalry or honour. You were a man who would use any weapon, any tactic, no matter how gruesome, to win. Historians still argue whether Vlad's campaign was an act of a strategic genius or a desperate gamble. Was he a military mastermind who understood the weaknesses of his enemy and exploited them with a ruthless efficiency? Or was he simply a man who was pushed into a corner, a man who had no other choice but to resort to extreme measures to save his country? The truth, as is often the case, is likely a mix of both. You were a man with a deep understanding of your enemy, a man who had spent his youth in their court, learning their ways. But you were also a man with a back against the wall, a man who had to resort to the most brutal tactics imaginable to survive. Your most famous act of this war is the night attack, a brilliant and daring raid on the Sultan's camp. Under the cover of darkness, you and a small force of loyal men, disguised in Ottoman uniforms, slipped into the enemy's camp. Your goal was to assassinate the Sultan, to cut the head off the snake and end the war in a single decisive blow. You did not succeed in killing the Sultan, but you did sow chaos, panic, and death. The Ottomans, awakened by the screams and the chaos, began to turn on each other, believing they were being attacked by their own men. The battle, if you can call it that, was a bloodbath, a scene of confusion and slaughter that left thousands of Ottoman soldiers dead. Remember that gentle sarcasm we spoke of? In this moment, in this dark, chaotic night, there is no sarcasm, only the cold, hard reality of war. You're not a hero, you're a man of war, a man who is willing to do whatever it takes to win. You're a man who has turned your country into a wasteland, your people into fugitives, and your enemies into a field of the impaled. You're a man who has no illusions about the nature of power, and no regrets about the choices you have made. You're a man who is fighting for his life, for his country, and for his legacy. And in that fight, you have become something that is both feared and revered, something that is both human and, in its own way, monstrous. The world may call you a tyrant, a sadist, a madman, but to your people, in this moment, you are a hero. And that, you know, is all that matters. The chaos of the night attack on the Ottoman camp has subsided, leaving a cold, blood-soaked silence in its wake. The Sultan, shaken but alive, has seen the true face of his enemy. You, Vlad, a ghost in the darkness, a shadow in the night, have struck a blow that no other ruler in Christendom would have dared. You have not just defeated his army, you have humiliated him personally. You have shown him that his might, his power, and his reputation mean nothing against a man who is willing to use any tactic, no matter how audacious, to win. The Ottoman army, demoralized and starved, begins to retreat, a grim procession of weary men and broken morale. Wallachia, against all odds, has survived. But a victory in war, as you know, is a fleeting thing. A victory in politics, on the other hand, is a more permanent and insidious threat. The Sultan, a pragmatic and clever ruler, has not been defeated. He has simply changed his strategy. If he cannot defeat you on the battlefield, he will defeat you from within, and for that he has the perfect tool, your brother, Radu. Radu, as you recall, was your fellow hostage in the Sultan's court. He was the charming, handsome and diplomatic one. He was the one who adapted, who thrived in the Ottoman court, who became a favourite of the Sultan's son, Mehmet II. He converted to Islam, was given the name Radu Shel Frumos, or Radu the Handsome, and was a trusted member of the Sultan's inner circle. He was, in short, everything you were not, and now he is coming home. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Sultan, after his failed military campaign, installed Radu as the new Prince of Wallachia. He gave him an army, a vast treasure, and a mandate to overthrow you. Radu was not just a foreign invader, he was a native son, a Wallachian who was now a Muslim, a brother who was now a mortal enemy. This was a brilliant move on the Sultan's part, a way to turn the Wallachian people against you by offering them a ruler who was, at least on the surface, one of their own. Imagine the scene through the eyes of a Wallachian peasant. For years you have lived under the rule of Vlad, a rule of harsh justice and unyielding fear. You have been safe from the Ottomans, yes, but you have also been forced to obey his every command, to pay your taxes on time, and to live in a kingdom of silence. And now a new prince arrives. He is handsome, charismatic, and he comes with a promise of peace, of prosperity, and of a more gentle rule. He is a Wallachian by birth, a brother of your prince, but he comes with the backing of the Sultan. He offers a new path, a path of peace and alliance with the great Ottoman Empire. To the war-weary people of Wallachia, this is a tempting offer. Your popularity, once a source of strength, begins to wane. The very people you fought for, the very people you protected with your brutal justice, are beginning to turn on you. They have grown tired of war, of scorched earth tactics, of living in a kingdom of fear. Radu, with his gentle promises and his Ottoman gold, is offering them an escape. He is offering them a return to a kind of peace, a kind of normalcy that they have not known in years. A quirky detail of this period is that Radu's army was not just made up of Ottoman soldiers. It was also made up of Wallachian boyars, men who had fled your reign of terror and found a new home in the Ottoman court. These men were your former enemies, the very people you had sought to destroy. Now they are returning, not as conquered enemies, but as conquering heroes. They are returning with a promise to restore the old order, to restore their power, and to avenge the deaths of their families. This was a deep, personal betrayal, a final, bitter twist of the knife. Historians still argue whether the Wallachian people's decision to abandon you for Radu was a betrayal of your leadership or a rational choice for survival. Were they a fickle people, ungrateful for the peace you had given them? Or were they a pragmatic people, choosing the path of least resistance in a world of constant war? The truth, as is often the case, is likely somewhere in the middle. They were a people who had been pushed to their breaking point, a people who were looking for an alternative to a ruler who was, in his own way, as terrifying as the enemy he was fighting. Your reign, which had been so absolute, so complete, begins to crumble. Your former allies, seeing the shifting political winds, begin to abandon you. The Hungarian crown, seeing a new opportunity to install a prince who would be more compliant with their wishes, also begins to withdraw its support. You, Vlad, a man who has built a kingdom on a foundation of fear and loyalty, are now finding that your foundation is made of sand. The very people you sought to control with your terror are now turning on you. You are a king without a kingdom, a prince without a people. You are once again a fugitive, a hunted man, a shadow in the mountains. But this time, you are not fleeing from a foreign army. You are fleeing from your own people. You are fleeing from your own brother. As you trudge through the dark, unforgiving mountains, you are left with nothing but your thoughts. The years of your reign, the years of your brutal justice now seem like a distant dream. You remember the boyars, their smug faces at the feast. You remember the forest of the impaled, the cold satisfaction of your revenge. You remember the Sultan, his terrified retreat. And you remember your brother, Radu, his handsome face, his easy smile. He has won. He has done what no army could do. He has taken your kingdom not with a sword, but with a promise. And as you disappear into the darkness, you know, with a grim certainty, that this is not the end. It is just the beginning of your next and final chapter. The world may have abandoned you, but you, Vlad, have not abandoned yourself. You will be back, and when you return you will be even more terrifying than before. You're a ghost in your own country, a prince without a throne, a man with a name that is both feared and now reviled by his own people. Your brother, Radu the Handsome, sits on your throne, a puppet prince in a kingdom that is, for the first time in years, at peace with the mighty Ottoman Empire. This peace, you know, is a fragile, deceptive thing, a peace bought with gold and secured with a willing submission to foreign rule. But to the war-weary peasants of Wallachia, it is a peace nonetheless. And in the face of that peace, your reign of terror, your brutal justice, now seems like a distant, unpleasant dream. Your journey of exile takes you once again to the court of a former enemy. You seek refuge in Hungary, with King Matthias Corvinus, the son of your old mentor, John Hunyadi. The irony is not lost on you. You are a man who has spent his entire reign fighting against the political influence of Hungary, and now you are a supplicant, a beggar at their court. But this is the brutal reality of 15th century politics, a game of shifting allegiances and cynical pragmatism, and you, Vlad, are a master player of that game. Matthias Corvinus is not your father's mentor. He is a young, ambitious king, a man who sees you not as a hero, but as a political tool. He understands the value of your name, of your reputation as a fierce warrior against the Ottomans. He understands that you are a thorn in the side of the Sultan, a man who can be used to destabilize a powerful enemy. But he is also a man who is cautious, a man who is not willing to let a man of your reputation run loose. And so, he has you arrested. The mainstream historical fact here is that you, Vlad, were imprisoned by Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. The reasons for your imprisonment are a matter of historical debate. The official story, the one that Matthias told the world, was that you were plotting with the Ottomans, a monstrous lie that was meant to justify your capture. He produced a series of fake letters, forged documents that purported to show your treachery. This was a brilliant piece of propaganda, a way to turn the world against you and to justify his own political ambitions. But the real reason, you know, is far simpler and more cynical. You are too dangerous to be free. Imagine the scene, your capture. You're not a king, a prince, or a warrior. You're a man, weary from a long journey, a man who has been betrayed by his own people. You're brought before King Matthias, a young man who has never known the kind of war you have fought, the kind of terror you have endured, and you are met not with a welcome, but with chains. You are a prisoner once again, a man who has lost his freedom for the second time in his life. But this time, the captivity is different. It is not in a gilded cage in the Sultan's court. It is in a cold, stone prison in the heart of Hungary. Your imprisonment lasts for 12 long years, 12 years of silence, of solitude, of a slow, agonizing wait. You're not a forgotten man, of course. The stories of your reign, the legends of your cruelty have spread throughout Europe. You're a subject of pamphlets and woodcuts, a character in a grim, terrifying tale. You're a bogeyman, a cautionary tale, a man whose name is whispered in the dark to frighten children. But in your prison, you are just a man with nothing but his memories and his hatred. A quirky detail that is often overlooked is the fact that you, during your imprisonment, were given a strange kind of freedom. You were not kept in a dungeon. You were, for a time, kept under house arrest, given a degree of movement within the castle. You were even, according to some sources, allowed to pursue a strange and macabre hobby, the hunting and impaling of small animals. This was a dark and twisted kind of therapy, a way for you to continue your reign of terror on a miniature scale. It was a sign that the monster had not been tamed, that the man who had ordered the death of thousands was still there, lurking beneath the surface. Historians still argue whether Vlad's imprisonment was a period of reflection and reform, or a period of simmering resentment and planning. Did he, in his long years of solitude, come to regret his actions, to repent for his sins? Or did he, with a cold, calculating fury, simply wait for his opportunity to return? The truth is likely that there was no repentance, no reform. There was only a cold, hard focus on the future. He was not a man who believed in regret. He was a man who believed in revenge. During your imprisonment, your brother Radu reigns in Wallachia. He's a popular ruler, a man who has brought peace and prosperity to the country. He has paid his tribute to the Sultan, and in return, Wallachia has been left alone. The people, who once feared you, now love him. He's a ruler who is gentle, a ruler who is kind. He is, in short, a ruler who is everything you are not. This is the ultimate betrayal, the ultimate humiliation. You are a prisoner in a foreign land, and your brother, the man who helped to depose you, is a beloved prince in your own country. But the political winds, as you know, are always shifting. Radu, for all his charm and his diplomacy, is still a puppet of the Ottomans. He is a symbol of their power, and as the Ottomans become more aggressive, more powerful, the Hungarians begin to see him as a liability. They begin to see you, Vlad, the imprisoned, forgotten prince, as a potential solution. They see a man who has a proven track record of fighting the Ottomans, a man who has a personal vendetta against them. They see a man who is a hero, a monster, and a weapon, all rolled into one. And so, after 12 long years, the chains are removed. You're no longer a prisoner, you're once again a king, but a king with a long, final road to walk. The clanking of the chains, a sound you have become all too familiar with over the last 12 years, finally ceases. The cold stone walls of your Hungarian prison, once your entire world, recede as you're led back into the light. King Matthias Corvinus, the same man who imprisoned you, now greets you with a smile and a handshake. The political winds have shifted, and a new storm is brewing in the east. Your brother, Radu the Handsome, for all his charm and diplomacy, has proven to be an unreliable tool for the Hungarians. The Ottomans are becoming more aggressive, and Matthias needs a weapon, a man who is not afraid to get his hands dirty, a man who has a personal vendetta against the Sultan. And that man, he has decided, is you. Your long imprisonment has not broken you. If anything, it has hardened you, turning the cold fire in your gut into a burning inferno. You have spent 12 long years thinking, planning, and waiting. You have watched as your brother Radu has reigned in Wallachia, a puppet of the Ottomans. You have watched as your people have submitted to a foreign power, and you have watched as the name of your family, the name of your father, has been dragged through the mud. You're not a man who forgets. You're not a man who forgives. You're a man who has been waiting for his revenge. The mainstream historical fact of this period is that your release and return to power were part of a larger Hungarian political strategy. King Matthias Corvinus, seeing a renewed Ottoman threat, needed a powerful anti-Ottoman figure to lead Wallachia. Radu, with his pro-Ottoman leanings, was no longer a viable option, and so Matthias, in a cynical but brilliant move, chose you. He not only released you from prison, but he also gave you a new wife, a cousin of his, to cement your allegiance to the Hungarian crown. You are no longer just a prince. You are now a powerful political asset, a member of the royal family, a man with a new kingdom to claim. Imagine yourself, a man in his late 40s returning to the world after 12 years of imprisonment. The world has changed. The political landscape has shifted, but you, Vlad, have not. The cold fury, the unwavering commitment to justice, the taste for revenge, all of it is still there, simmering just beneath the surface. You're not a new man. You're the same man, just older, wiser, and more dangerous. You're a man who has learned the hard lessons of power, a man who knows that loyalty is not given, but taken. And you are a man who has a score to settle. Your first target is not Wallachia, but your brother, Radu. Radu, who has been ruling Wallachia for years, has no idea that you have been released. He is living a life of peace and prosperity, a life that you, Vlad, have never known. But that life is about to come to a violent and abrupt end. You're given a Hungarian army, a contingent of loyal men who are sworn to your cause, and you march, not as a conquering hero, but as a silent, vengeful ghost. A quirky detail that is often lost in this part of your story is the fact that your return was shrouded in a strange kind of secrecy. The Hungarians did not announce your release to the world. They did not trumpet your return in a grand procession. They simply released you and gave you an army. This was a tactical decision. They wanted you to arrive as a surprise, a shock to the system, a sudden, violent change that would catch your enemies off guard. And it worked. Your arrival in Wallachia was a sudden, violent return to the past, a return to a time of terror and a time of war. Historians still argue whether Vlad's return to power was a moment of triumph or a desperate last gasp. Was he a hero, a king returning to his rightful throne, or was he a puppet, a tool of the Hungarian crown? a man who had no other choice but to fight their wars for them. The truth is likely that he was a bit of both. You were a man who was fighting for his throne, yes, but you were also a man who was fighting for his legacy, for his name, for his family. You were a man who had been a prisoner for 12 years, and now you were free. And in that freedom, you saw only one path, a path of vengeance. Your campaign against Radu is swift and brutal. Radu, for all his charisma and his charm, is not a warrior. He is a diplomat, a politician, a man who has won his throne with words, not with a sword. His army, a mix of Wallachian loyalists and Ottoman mercenaries, is no match for your seasoned, battle-hardened troops. The battle is a rout. Radu is defeated, and he is forced to flee, a desperate, hunted man, just as you were 12 years ago. You're back on the throne of Wallachia. But this is not a moment of triumph. This is a moment of cold, grim satisfaction. The city is quiet. The people are silent. They remember your reign of terror. They remember the forest of the impaled. They remember the fear. And they are not celebrating. They are simply waiting. They are waiting to see what you, Vlad the Impaler, will do next. They are waiting to see if you are a changed man. And you, in your grim, unyielding wisdom, know that you are not. You are the same man, a man who has been waiting for his revenge, a man who is now ready to take it. The final chapter of your life has begun. It will be a short chapter, a violent chapter, a chapter that will be filled with the same terror and brutality that defined your first reign. But this time it will be different. This time you are not just fighting for your throne, you are fighting for your life, you are fighting for your legacy, and you will not stop. You will not rest. You will not know peace until every single one of your enemies is dead. Your brother, your old boyars, the Ottoman Sultan himself, all of them will pay, and you, Vlad the Impaler, will be the one who makes them pay. The king has returned, and the kingdom will tremble. The throne of Wallachia, a cold, hard stone seat that you have longed for, is once again beneath you. Your brother, Radu, is a hunted fugitive, his reign of peace and diplomacy brought to a brutal and abrupt end. The people of Wallachia, who had grown accustomed to his gentle rule, now look upon you with a mixture of fear and trepidation. They remember your name, they remember your face, they remember the forest of the impaled, and they are waiting. They are waiting to see if the monster has returned, and you, Vlad, in your grim, unforgiving wisdom, know that the monster has never left. Your final comeback, however, is not a grand, glorious return. It is a brief, violent flash of triumph before the darkness descends for good. You are on the throne for only a few short months, a fleeting moment of power that is as intense as it is short-lived. This is a crucial part of your story, a mainstream historical fact that is often overlooked in the grander narratives of your reign. Your final reign was not a period of consolidation, of rebuilding, of vengeance. It was a period of a man, a king, a warrior, fighting for his life against an enemy he could not defeat. The enemy, of course, is the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan, Mehmet II, is not a man who forgives a defeat, especially a defeat as humiliating as the one you inflicted upon him. He sees your return not as a political shift, but as a personal insult. He sees you not as a ruler, but as a thorn in his side that must be removed. And he sends a new army, a new commander, to Wallachia to finish the job that he had started years ago. This new army, however, is not led by the Sultan himself. It is led by a powerful Ottoman general, a man who is as ruthless and as cunning as you are. He is not a man who is afraid of your reputation. He is a man who is coming to kill you, and he is not a man who is going to make the same mistakes that the Sultan did. He is not going to march into your forests and be terrified by your impaled enemies. He is a man who has come to fight a war, a real war, a war of swords and blood. Imagine yourself, Vlad, a man in his late 40s, a man who has spent 12 years in prison. You are not a young man anymore. You are not a man who can ride all night and fight all day. You are a man who is a king, yes, but you are a king who is fighting for his life. Your army is small, a mix of loyalists and mercenaries, and you are facing a force that is far superior in both numbers and discipline. This is a war you cannot win with a scorched earth policy. This is a war you cannot win with psychological terror. This is a war that you must win with a sword. The battles are brutal, bloody, and relentless. You fight with a ferocity that is born of a lifetime of pain and a cold, hard hatred for your enemy. You are a man who is fighting not just for his kingdom, but for his very existence. You are fighting for your name, for your legacy, for the memory of your father and your brother. You are fighting a war that you know you cannot win, but you are fighting it anyway, because you, Vlad, have never been a man who gives up. You are a man who fights until the very end. A quirky detail that historians have often pointed to is the strange, almost forgotten fact of your final days. You were not a forgotten, deposed king. You were a man who was fighting a war, a man who was still a hero to some. One of the accounts of your final days, a popular one, is that you were not in Wallachia at all. You were, according to this account, fighting for your old mentor, King Matthias Corvinus, on a different front. You were a man who was still a soldier, a man who was still fighting a war, even when your own kingdom had been lost. This adds a layer of depth to your story, a sense of a man who was not just a king, but a warrior. A man who was, in his own way, a true knight of the Order of the Dragon. Historians still argue whether Vlad's final campaign was an act of a strategic genius or a desperate last stand. Was he a man who was still a master of war, a man who was still able to outwit his enemies with his cunning and his ferocity? Or was he a man who was simply fighting a desperate losing battle, a man who was fighting with a fury that was born of a lifetime of pain and a knowledge that his end was near? The truth is likely that it was a bit of both. You were a man who was still a great warrior, a man who was still able to inspire his men with his courage and his fury. But you were also a man who was fighting a war that he could not win, a man who was fighting for a kingdom that was already lost. The final battle, the final moment of your life, is a blur of chaos and violence. The accounts of your death are conflicting, a mix of legends, rumours and half-truths. Some say you were killed in a battle with the Ottomans, a hero's death on the battlefield. Others say you were killed by one of your own, a traitor's knife in the back. Still others say you were killed by one of your loyal men, a man who mistook you for an enemy in the chaos of a battle. The truth, you know, is that it doesn't matter. The truth is that your end was a violent and abrupt end, a fitting end for a man who had lived his entire life in a world of violence. Your final moments are not of a king on a throne, but of a warrior on a battlefield. You are fighting, you are swinging your sword, you are screaming, and then there is nothing. There is only a cold silence, a silence that will echo throughout the ages, a silence that will be broken only by the stories, the legends, the whispers of your name. Your final act was not one of peace or of triumph. It was an act of a man who fought until the very end, a man who was, in his own way, a true hero and a true monster. The final swing of your sword, the last desperate cry in the chaos of battle, is the moment where history gives way to myth. You, Vlad, a man of flesh and blood, a prince of a small country, are gone. Your life, a brutal and violent tapestry of vengeance, justice and cruelty, has come to an end. But your story, as you know, is just beginning. The circumstances of your death are shrouded in a dense fog of conflicting accounts and historical rumours, a final, fittingly mysterious chapter to a life lived in shadows. A mainstream historical fact of your death is that it occurred sometime in late 1476. You were in the middle of a war, a desperate campaign to hold on to a throne you had only just reclaimed. The reports of your death are varied and contradictory, a testament to the chaotic nature of the time and the power of propaganda. Some sources, most of them Hungarian, claim you were killed in a heroic battle against the Ottomans, a martyr for Christendom. These accounts, of course, were meant to turn you into a saint, a hero that could be used to rally support for future crusades. Other accounts, most of them from Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire, claim you were killed by one of your own, a treacherous boyar who saw a chance to end your reign of terror once and for all. These accounts, of course, were meant to turn you into a cautionary tale, a man who, in the end, was undone by his own brutality. Imagine yourself, Vlad, a man who has lived his entire life in a world of treachery and betrayal. It is a grim irony that your end is also a story of treachery and betrayal, a final bitter lesson in the nature of power. Were you killed by a loyal soldier who mistook you for an Ottoman in the chaos of battle? A plausible story, one that speaks to the tragic nature of war. Or were you killed by one of your own men, a man who saw a chance to end your reign and seize power for himself? A more fitting end, one that speaks to the cold, cynical reality of the world you lived in. A quirky detail that has often been repeated in the legends of your death is the story of your severed head. According to some accounts, your head was cut off and sent to the Sultan, Mehmet II, in Constantinople. The Sultan, a man who had been humiliated by you, a man who had fled from your forest of the impaled, allegedly had your head placed on a stake as a final act of revenge. This was a grim, symbolic act, a way for the Sultan to show the world that the Impaler, the great enemy of the Ottoman Empire, was finally dead. It was a macabre kind of triumph, a final act of psychological warfare that was waged not by you, but against you. Historians still argue about the true location of your body. The most popular theory is that you were buried in the monastery of Snagov, a small island monastery located in a lake near Bucharest. For centuries, this was believed to be your final resting place. But when archaeologists opened the tomb in the 20th century, they found it empty, or filled with the remains of a man who was not you. This is the great mystery of your death, the final frustrating piece of a puzzle that can never be fully solved. The question of your final resting place is a question that, for a man who lived his life as a shadow, a ghost, a legend, seems almost too perfect. The question of your burial place is not just an archaeological one, it is a symbolic one. For a man who built his legacy on the gruesome display of bodies, on the public spectacle of death, it is a grim irony that his own body has vanished. It is a final, poetic injustice, a way for history to have the last laugh on a man who believed he could control it. Your body, the vessel of your vengeance, the source of your terror, has disappeared, and in its place is a void, a space that can be filled with whatever we want it to be filled with. A saint's body, a martyr's remains, a devil's corpse. The choice, you see, is ours. As the years pass, the stories of your reign become more and more exaggerated. The pamphlets and woodcuts of your time, which were often commissioned by your enemies and your rivals, become the basis for a new kind of legend. You are no longer just Vlad the Impaler. You are a devil, a sadist, a man who drinks the blood of his enemies. Your name, Dracul, the son of the dragon, is corrupted into Dracula, a name that will become synonymous with a new kind of monster, a monster of the night, a vampire. This is the final and most lasting legacy of your reign. You were a man who lived in a world of violence and brutality, a world where the lines between good and evil were blurred, a world where a man who was a hero to some was a monster to others. But in the end, you became a myth. You became a character in a story that would be told and retold, a story that would forever be associated with terror and darkness. Your life, a brutal reality, was transformed into a fantastical fiction. And in that fiction, you, Vlad, found a kind of immortality. An immortality that you, in your grim, unforgiving wisdom, would have probably appreciated. After all, what is more terrifying, more lasting, than a ghost that lives forever? The sword has long since been laid to rest, the blood has washed away, and the final whispers of your name have faded into the mists of history. You, Vlad, a prince of Wallachia, a man of flesh and blood, are no more. But your legacy, a dark and tangled vine of truth and fiction, has just begun to bloom. The real you, the man who fought for his country, who avenged his family and who ruled with an iron fist, has been lost to time. In his place, a new figure has emerged, a figure of myth and legend, a character whose name is now synonymous with the night, with blood, and with a kind of immortal evil. A mainstream historical fact is the genesis of the Dracula myth. Your name, Dracul, which meant dragon, a symbol of your father's allegiance to a powerful Christian order, was eventually corrupted into Dracula, or son of the dragon. But in a world where the devil was often associated with dragons, the name took on a darker connotation. The word Drac, in some Romanian dialects, also means devil. Your name, a badge of honour, became a symbol of a different kind of power, a power that was not of this world. This was the first step in your transformation, the moment when the man began to give way to the monster. The stories of your reign, the pamphlets and the woodcuts that were created by your enemies, were a powerful form of early propaganda. They depicted you as a sadist, a madman, a ruler who delighted in the suffering of his people. These stories, as we know, were often exaggerated, a mix of truth and fiction designed to paint you as a monster. But in a world without newspapers, without television, without the internet, these stories were the only reality that most people knew. And in these stories, you, Vlad, were not a prince, you were a devil. A quirky detail that often gets overlooked is the difference in how you were remembered in the East and the West. In Wallachia and parts of Eastern Europe, you were often seen as a national hero, a brave and ruthless warrior who fought against the mighty Ottoman Empire. The stories of your cruelty were often softened, reframed as necessary evils, as the actions of a man who did what he had to do to save his country. But in the West, in Germany, in France, in England, you were a monster, a boogeyman, a symbol of a cruel and barbaric East. The stories of your atrocities were retold and embellished, becoming a kind of dark folklore, a grim fairy tale to frighten children. This stark difference in your legacy is a testament to the power of perspective, to the idea that a hero to one person can be a villain to another. Historians still argue about the true nature of your cruelty. Was it a result of psychological trauma, of the years you spent as a hostage in the Ottoman court? Was it a calculated political strategy, a way to rule a fractured and treacherous kingdom with a new kind of absolute power? Or was it simply the personality of a man who was, in his own way, a true sociopath, a man who derived pleasure from the suffering of others? The answer, as is often the case, is likely a mix of all three. You were a product of your time, a man of profound personal trauma, and a man who understood with a chilling clarity that fear was the most powerful tool a ruler could possess. The final transformation of your legacy, the moment when the man was completely swallowed by the myth, came in the 19th century. An Irish writer named Bram Stoker, who was researching a new book, came across the stories of your reign. He was captivated by the tales of your cruelty, by the name Dracula, by the dark Gothic landscape of Wallachia. And he, in a moment of creative genius, took the name of the man and gave it to a new kind of monster, a vampire, a creature of the night who lived forever, who drank the blood of the innocent, who ruled his kingdom with an ancient, terrifying power. In a way, Stoker's creation was the perfect mirror for your own life. You were a man who, in his own way, was a kind of immortal. You were a man who had built a kingdom on a foundation of blood. You were a man who was feared by all who knew your name. And you were a man who, in the end, was a kind of monster. The myth of Dracula, with its Gothic castles, its beautiful victims, and its ancient evil, was not so much a departure from your life, but a kind of a dark and twisted culmination of it. It was a story that took all the darkness, all the terror, all the cruelty of your reign, and gave it a new, fantastical form. And so, here we are, at the end of our journey. We have seen a boy, a hostage, a prince, a fugitive, a king, and a legend. We have seen a man who was a hero to some and a monster to others, and we have seen how that man, through the slow and insidious alchemy of history, was transformed into a myth that would last forever. The stories of your reign are a testament to the power of fear, to the brutal nature of power, and to the enduring legacy of a single, unforgettable name. Now, as the screen fades to black and the final credits roll on this story, let's take a moment to breathe. The journey is over. The terror has subsided. The world of Vlad the Impaler, a world of darkness and violence, has returned to its proper place, a place in the past. But the echoes of that world, the whispers of his name, will continue to haunt us. A grim reminder that history is not always a story of heroes and villains, but of men, of monsters, and of the dark and tangled space that lies in between. The air around you is quiet. The images of impaled enemies and crumbling castles fading into the darkness behind your eyelids. Your muscles, tense from the journey, begin to relax. Feel the soft weight of your blanket, the gentle hum of the fan, the quiet of the night. It's time to let go of the shadows, to release the grip of history, and to allow the gentle hand of sleep to guide you away. The story is over, the prince is at rest, and the kingdom, for a little while, is at peace. May your dreams be of quiet meadows and gentle breezes, of stories that have no monsters, and of a world where all the dragons have finally gone to sleep. Good night.